Welcome to this explainer. Today we're diving into one of the absolute most explosive, provocative documents of the 20th century, F.T. Marinetti's 1909 Manifesto of Futurism. Now, we're not just going to sit here and read some dry history, right? Instead, we're going to use the text's very own built-in metaphor of a high-speed car chase to really map out its radical, speed-obsessed ideology. Marinetti didn't just write down a list of rules. No, he wrote this breathless, adrenaline-fueled narrative meant to completely shock his audience into a totally new way of seeing the modern world. So you might want to buckle up, because we are definitely going for a ride.
All right, so let's set the scene here. Marinetti kicks things off by describing this intense, late-night intellectual debate among friends. I mean, picture them. They're surrounded by these ornate mosque lamps with brass cupolas, literally trampling their native sloth on these super opulent Persian carpets. They are trapped in all this luxury of the old world, but they're restless. They're fueled by what he calls their electric hearts, and they are just pushing their arguments right to the absolute limits of logic. They stay up all night, feeling totally alone, kind of like lighthouses or sentinels in a dark outpost, furiously scrawling the paper with what he calls demented writing, right up until that heavy silence of the night is finally broken.
And man, that deep, ancient silence is completely shattered. First, they get distracted by this sudden, violent rumbling of huge double-decker trams leaping past outside. And then they hear it, the defining sound of the new century, the hungry automobiles roaring beneath their windows. This sudden mechanical roar, it just totally shifts their energy. It's like a technological wake-up call. Prompted by this, Marinetti basically says, that's it. He declares they are leaving old mythology and mystic cults behind forever. They're rushing out to witness what he calls the very first sunrise on Earth, totally ready to break down the gates of life itself.
So let's see how this actually builds. Marinetti and his friends ditch those plush carpets for a literal and metaphorical joyride. First, they run outside and go right up to these three snorting machines to basically caress their breasts. Then Marinetti describes laying beneath the steering wheel, which, by the way, he morbidly compares to a guillotine knife threatening his stomach. Talk about dramatic, right? Finally, this great sweep of madness just drives them to hurl through the streets like dried-up torrents. They start describing their cars as wild beasts that rely on smell rather than mathematical eyes, and they envision themselves as young lions actively hunting death, which is running right before them in this vast violet sky.
They are just hurling themselves into the immense mouth of the world, crushing watchdogs beneath their burning wheels. But then, a sudden swerve. With the mad intoxication of puppies biting their own tails, Marinetti suddenly comes face to face with two cyclists wobbling in front of him. He describes them as two persuasive but contradictory reasons. And these cyclists, they perfectly represent the old world's careful, cautious, balanced logic. Basically, everything Marinetti despises. So to avoid this stupid, swaying logic getting in his way, he stops short and, in total disgust, hurls his speeding car head over heels straight into a factory ditch.
Now, here is where it gets really interesting. This violent crash, it isn't framed as a failure or some awful tragedy. No way. For Marinetti, it's a glorious baptism. He lands in this maternal ditch, half full of muddy water, and actually savors a mouthful of strengthening muck from the factory gutter. As he pulls his body up, all mud-spattered and smelly, he says he felt a red-hot poker of joy deliciously pierce his heart. Meanwhile, a crowd of terrified fishermen and naturalists are using grappling irons to fish out his car, which he compares to a stranded shark. But the shark isn't dead. With a single caress of its powerful back, it completely revives. And right there, covered in metal scratches and good factory mud, he dictates a brand new testament for humanity.
Section 1. Rules of the Road. The ideology of futurism. With the engine running and the factory mud finally cleared from his eyes, we enter the actual, formal manifesto of futurism. And this is an uncompromising set of rules that draws a brutal, explicit line in the sand. He argues that up until now, the world's literature and art have basically glorified pensive immobility, ecstasy, and slumber. You know, it was slow, it was thoughtful, it was quiet. The futurists, they want to completely flip that paradigm. Their new poetry is built entirely on courage, audacity, and revolt. They want to exalt movements of raw physical aggression, feverish sleeplessness, the perilous sleep, and, quite literally, the slap and the blow with the fist. They believe beauty exists only in struggle, and poetry must be a violent assault on the forces of the unknown. This next point brilliantly illustrates their central and probably most famous claim about aesthetics. You've probably heard of the victory of Samothrace, right? It's that legendary ancient Greek marble sculpture, a global symbol of classical, refined artistic perfection. Well, Marinetti boldly declares that the splendor of the world has been enriched by a totally new beauty, the beauty of speed. To the futurists, a racing automobile with its bonnet adorned with explosive tubes, a roaring motor car that sounds like it runs on machine gun fire, has entirely replaced that ancient statue. For them, the mechanical and the violently fast are literally the new pinnacle of human aesthetic achievement. When we look at the core tenets of their philosophy, the dashboard indicators powering this movement are just pushed to the absolute extreme. The manifesto explicitly calls to glorify war, which they shockingly label the only cure for the world. They firmly champion militarism, intense patriotism, and the destructive gestures of anarchists. They also explicitly state their contempt for women, fighting feminism alongside what they call opportunist cowardice. Now, as an explainer, we are simply examining the source material neutrally here, but it's vital to understand the incredibly aggressive parameters they set for their assault on societal norms. Section 2. Burning the rearview mirror, erasing the past. To drive this incredibly fast, to live entirely in what he calls the absolute of omnipresent speed, Marinetti argues you have to intentionally smash the rearview mirror. You literally have to erase the past. Remember, he's writing this in Italy, a country basically built right on top of the ruins of the Roman Empire and the Renaissance, and he felt completely suffocated by it. He argued that Italy had been, for way too long, the great second-hand market. He desperately wanted to deliver his country from what he vividly described as a gangrene of professors, archaeologists, tourist guides, and antiquaries. He argued the whole country was covered in innumerable museums that acted like sinister cemeteries, where bodies that don't even know each other just sleep side by side forever in these public dormitories. To prevent the sheer weight of the past from acting as a funeral urn for their explosive energy, the manifesto goes so far as to call for actual physical destruction. Marinetti actively welcomes the good incendiaries with charred fingers to come and do their work. He commands them to demolish the museums and the libraries, to take picks and hammers and undermine the foundations of venerable towns. He even tells them to heap up fire to the library shelves and divert the canals to flood the cellars of the museums, just so that the glorious ancient canvases can float away totally ruined. So the crucial point here is Marinetti basically slamming on the brakes, turning to look the reader directly in the eye and asking these provocative questions. Do you want to poison yourselves? Do you want to rot? He genuinely warns that taking your sadness, your fragile courage, and your anxiety to a museum every single day is literally toxic. He believes that daily admiration of the past will just cause you to waste the absolute best part of your strength. You'll emerge from that useless admiration exhausted, diminished, and trampled on. For the futurists, looking backward isn't just boring, it is literal death. Section 3. The inevitable finish line. A self-consuming engine. So, you've got to ask yourself, what exactly happens to a high-speed movement that can only accelerate? One that thrives solely on aggression and violently despises anything older than yesterday? What is the inevitable finish line for a self-consuming engine like that? Well, the futurists actually openly and quite enthusiastically acknowledged their own incredibly short life cycle. Marinetti points out that the oldest among them are not even 30 years old yet. He says they have 10 years to accomplish their task and deliriously waste their treasures of strength, love, and courage. But by the time they hit age 40, they expect to be viewed as useless manuscripts, just ready for the waste paper basket. Once they are over 40, they fully anticipate that a new generation of younger, stronger men, sniffing out their decaying spirits, will arrive to ruthlessly throw them away. And Marinetti envisions this inevitable end with some surprisingly poetic detail. He doesn't picture them dying quietly in bed. Oh no. He imagines that younger generation finding them at last, on a winter's night, way out in the depths of the country. They'll be huddled in a sad hangar, echoing with the monotonous rain, crouched near their trembling aeroplanes. And what will they be doing? They will be warming their hands at a wretched fire made from burning their very own books, the books of today, flaming gaily beneath the flight of their pictures. As they warm their hands by the fire of their own obsolete work, they predict their younger successors will crowd around them, just panting with anguish and exasperation. And then, the younger generation will hurl forward to kill them. But here's the catch. They will do it out of both hatred and a profound admiration for their predecessors' indefatigable courage. Marinetti actually welcomes this. He says a strong, healthy injustice will shine from their executors' eyes. And for him, this proves the movement's self-destructive ultimate truth, that art can only ever be violence, cruelty, and injustice. As we conclude this explainer, we are basically left standing in the fiery aftermath of this high-speed chase. Marinetti claims their hearts aren't tired because they are constantly nourished by fire, hatred, and speed. He completely brushes aside all objections from people who say we're merely the prolongation of our ancestors. Instead, he issues this breathless final challenge, shouting from the World Summit to the stars themselves. It really forces us to ask, what truly remains when an entire ideology's only goal is to never, ever look back? We hope this explainer has given you a really clear, structured understanding of the explosive dawn of futurism. Thanks for riding along with us. Until next time.